Hi, I'm Ranger Nicole. Welcome to Seneca Falls here at Women's Rights National Historical Park. We're here to talk about the Wesleyan Methodist Chapel today right here in downtown. And the Wesleyan Chapel is where the 1848 Women's Rights Convention was held. What was happening in town at that time? Well, it was a growing town with a canal making businesses boom. There was a lot of different changes going on around, different reforms. People were interested in things like anti-slavery, temperance. They were trying to work through religious reforms. And throughout all these changes, women were trying to find their place in it, their role. What could women do? What were they allowed to do? And so these discussions were happening throughout the decades before the 1848 convention. And in 1848, a group of local women and their friends gathered to take a further step and have their own convention to talk about women and women's issues, their civil, social, and religious rights. And that was the first time that that happened publicly in the United States. And so now we will talk more about the convention and the chapel. Here we are today in the Wesleyan Chapel. This is where 300 people gathered over 2 days in 1848 in July, much like we are today. And in doing so, they started a dialogue about women. And in 1843, when this chapel was built, the reformers called this place kind of a hub for reform. And so a lot of the people involved in the convention, they would know the people that came to this chapel. And so it was a natural choice for our group of organizers in 1848 to pick this building. It was one of the only buildings available to reformers that could hold such a big group. And so our organizers, mostly 5 women from the local area and their families. Lucretia Mott, she was visiting from Philadelphia. She was a Quaker anti-slavery reformer. And there is Marianne McClintock, who was from Philadelphia originally, came up to Waterloo, and she was an organizer of lots of different things like anti-slavery fairs. There was Jane Hunt, who hosted this gathering over on July 9th in Waterloo, getting all of her friends together. There was Martha Coffin Wright, who lived over in Auburn, Lucretia's younger sister, but she spoke her own mind, and she made quite a storm over in Auburn. They called her a very dangerous woman because she spoke out and was participating in Underground Railroad activities. And there was also Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who was a newcomer to town, and she ended up kind of instigating this whole convention in a way. She recognized that this group of like-minded people could really make a difference. So when they were talking about just having tea, it ended up being a planning meeting. So they arranged this whole convention in 10 days, and not much time at all. And they ended up inviting lots of their friends. They invited Frederick Douglass, who owned a newspaper in Rochester at the time. They all gathered here in the chapel on July 19th and 20th. Like I said, 300 people showed up over 2 days. They hadn't really known how many to expect. And beforehand, the McClintock family and Elizabeth Cady Stanton had sat down and put together a document to present at this convention. They called it the Declaration of Sentiments, and it was important because it delineated the rights that they wanted for women. At the time, women couldn't own property if they were married. They didn't have custody of their children. If you were a single woman, you still had to pay taxes, even if you weren't represented in your government. So they had a lot of qualms about the laws in their time. And so over the 2 days, they discussed the Declaration of Sentiments, seeing if they wanted to add or change anything. Most of it was pretty unanimously agreed upon. The item that caused the most stir and controversy was actually the right to vote for women, one that we think of the most today. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton introduced the right to vote for women. Frederick Douglass also gave a speech backing her up. And a lot of people were hesitant. At this time, it was just kind of beyond thinking that women would be given the political right to vote at a time when they were struggling to be recognized as fully capable adult human beings. And so this caused a big debate, but they did end up putting it in there, and their argument was that if you have the right to vote, you can protect all these other rights that you want to achieve. So they put that into the final document, and it spread through newspapers after the convention was over. There was a follow-up convention in Rochester, and after that the movement changed and grew over the decades. And after that, this chapel changed as well. It had the Wesleyan Methodist for a time, and then they moved to a different chapel. And then it was used for many different things, like an opera house and a movie theater, a roller skating rink, a car mechanic shop. Its last form was an apartment building and a laundromat. And there's still people in town who remember living in the chapel. It really wasn't that long ago, in the 1970s. And in the 70s, there was a big push to preserve historic buildings like the Wesleyan Chapel that tell the stories of people interested in equality and women's rights. So there was a big movement locally as well as nationally to start talking about these women's stories and women's history. And so there was enough support that the Women's Rights National Historical Park was established in 1980, and then they acquired different properties like the Wesleyan Chapel. And now that the Park Service has the chapel, it will preserve and protect it for future generations to come and hear these stories and have their own experiences here. It's also our centennial year of the 19th Amendment being passed. That was kind of the next big milestone, even though it didn't end all of the struggles for women, especially women like Native American women and Chinese American women who weren't considered citizens yet in 1920. And it also didn't prevent there from being things like poll taxes and literacy tests in the South especially that prohibited a lot of women of color from voting, especially African Americans down in the South. Threats of violence as well. So it wasn't the be-all, end-all, that 19th Amendment, but it was a giant step forward in saying that the right to vote could not be prohibited based on gender. So it was a giant step forward, and we are commemorating that 100 years this year in 2020 with events throughout and in this special convention days. And so I'd like to thank you for joining us today in that commemoration.